Okay, so here we are in the crash course in Jewish holidays. And before we get into any of the specifics of the holidays, I want to talk about the Jewish concept of time. Because surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly by now, the Jewish notion of time is very different than the Western notion of time. So let's take a look at that because, time is something we take for granted, just sort of like the backdrop to our lives. But the way one relates to time and how we progress through it is going to shape their view of life when you think about it. And clearly, it's going to have an impact on the way you relate to what's happening on a holiday. Okay, so what is the Western notion of time? So the Western notion of time essentially is that time is linear. Time moves forward, it kind of progresses, and every day is another 24 hours of a puff of time of existence that we live in. And as we progress and age, more time is added to the continuum. So that's the Western notion of time. So when you think about holidays in the Western notion really have no intrinsic relationship to the past. Meaning, imagine over here, July 4th this year really has no connection to July 4th last year. I mean, this was then and this is now, or to 100 years ago or to 200 years ago. They share the same calendar date, but there really is no inherent connection between them. So we'll use July 4th this year to commemorate what happened in the past, but the past of the past and now is the now. Now, in terms of the Jewish notion of time, the Jewish notion of time is that time is cyclical. So instead of imagining on a line, just kind of moving forward, in the Jewish approach to the calendar, we have this idea that time is sort of like a cycle that goes around and around, but instead of sort of bumping into the past, there's an element of change. So it kind of spirals upward. But there is a relationship between what happened today to what happened in yesteryear. And we understand that there are times within the calendar that we actually confront something that happened from the past. So if you can imagine like these beams of light. So in terms of the Jewish holidays, their holiness is derived from the past meeting up with the present. So let's take Passover, for example. That freedom that was experienced by the Jewish people when we left the land of Egypt and became a nation, that freedom, even though it was a local event for the Jews back then at that cycle of time, the light that was revealed through that event, that light of freedom, that spiritual light still continues to exist and traverses through time. So every year when the Jewish people meet up with Passover, we're not commemorating what happened all the way back down here, but we're actually reliving and experiencing a light that's relevant to us in our generation, in our personal lives, and collectively in our national lives that we can access and grow from. And that's happening throughout different points of the year. So holidays are very different. They're very dynamic because we have to meet up and prepare for them so we can receive that light. And it's interesting, if you look at the Hebrew word for year, which is Shana, like we say on Rosh Hashanah, Shana Tova, you have a good year. The word Shana in Hebrew is linked to different roots. For example, the word Lishnot means to repeat, because that's what's happening every year. We're repeating a cycle. On the other hand, it also means a change, a shinui. A change is related to that root word shana. So even though we're reviewing the cycle, there's an element of change because the Jewish people have changed. We've advanced another year forward. It's sort of like, if you go to Florida, even though it's a different year, you get to the beaches and it's the same, palm trees and sand and the ocean, but it's a different year. So it's sort of the inverse. You get back to that holiday of Passover, even though it's a different millennia, but it's the same environment that existed. So just like when you get back to the beaches, you feel a certain way. When you get to the holiday of Passover, you're also going to feel a certain way every year because you're touching something that we've experienced before that still exists through time. It's a consistency. And we're going to see the Jewish concept of time reflected in some of the names of the holidays. We have different names of the Jewish holidays. One is a moed. A moed literally means a meeting point. For example, we learned in the crash course in Torah that the Jews built this tabernacle in the desert, but it was called an ohel moed, a tent of meeting, because that's where God's presence was, and Moses would meet him there, and the Jewish people would meet, so to speak, the Almighty there. So it's a meeting place. So there's a meeting point in time that the holidays represent. Another name for the holidays is Yom Tov, or in Yiddish, you'll often hear people say Yantiv. But Yom Tov means a good day. Now, the word good, tov, the first time it's mentioned in the Torah is in terms of light, right? God saw the light that it was good. And there's the idea, these are days that are good because there's a light that shines through these days that we access and enrich ourselves with and grow from. So that's Yom Tov. I'm going to point out two other names we have that you might be familiar with. We have Chag, which means a festival. You'll often hear people say Chag Sameach, you should have a happy holiday. It really means Chag is a festival. And we also have the word Regel. Regel means a pilgrimage. We're going to learn very shortly there are certain holidays within the Torah that Jews have to make a pilgrimage up to Jerusalem. And it's interesting, the word Regel means leg because a pilgrimage is done on our legs. We walk up to Jerusalem, up to the temple, and that's where we'll celebrate the holiday there. So you can see the Jewish holiday is very different based on our notion of time, and that's why there's such activity around the holidays, and certain mitzvot, certain commandments are involved with it, because we're going to learn how to access that light by the way that we observe the holiday. We're going to get to that shortly in an upcoming video. So let's do a little review. We say there are two different notions of time. We have the Western notion of time, which is linear. It's always moving forward, and there's no intrinsic relationship to the past. So a holiday is just a commemoration of what happened in yesteryear. The Jewish notion is cyclical. It's a cycle going around like a spiral, and we have these points on the cycle which reflect a certain light that existed then that's still current till today. And this idea is reflected in the Hebrew word for year, which is Shana, which also means to repeat and also to change. And there are different names for the holidays. Some reflect this idea. The first is Moed, which means a meeting point, in our case, in time. We have a Yom Tov, a good day, because the goodness is that light that shines through. We also have Chag, which is a festival, Chag Sameach, happy holidays. And Regel is a pilgrimage when we have to go up to Jerusalem.